Ever written Python code, hit enter, and boom, error? Yeah, me too. It's like Python is personally offended by my logic. But don't worry, today we're tackling Python errors and exceptions, what they mean, why they happen, and how to stop them from ruining your day. So if you tried of debugging like a lost soul, stick around, and by the end of the video you'll be learning everything there is to know about errors and exceptions. So let's get started. Okay, so in Python, there are two types of problems you can face while executing a code. One are errors, and others are exceptions. Now, what is the actual difference between these two? So basically, errors are those problems that are caused due to something wrong in the code. Let's say those typically are syntax errors, where you mess up syntax of particular line in the code, and indentation error. Okay, where you also again mess up indentation on one of the code. So what happens is when these types of errors occur, program will not execute. So it completely stops the execution. The program will not execute, right? But in terms of exceptions, exceptions are those problems that you run while code is actually running. So let's say you take a user input, okay? I'll show you example when we move on to VS Code, so don't worry. So let's say we are taking an input, and let's say this is an int. So let me just quickly do that. Let's say this is an int. We are taking an input as an integer, right? Here, what we did is we took an input as an integer. But what if user inputs ABC here, which is not an integer, which is a character? What happens? A value error. So it throws a value error because the user inputted a character inside the int input, right? So these problems are called exceptions. Okay, this may be another example of this is when you try to divide something by 0. So let's say you do 2 divided with 0. Now this will result in 0 division error. Okay, there are a couple different types of errors. We'll get to that in a bit. I'll show you a couple different types of exceptions in Python, so hold on a minute. But I want to actually explain what are exceptions. Okay, so these are what we call exceptions, which are syntax-wise are correct, but we still run into problems because they are not logically correct. Okay, they are not logically correct. Okay, so these are what we call exceptions. So let's move on to VS Code and I'll show you how errors and exceptions work. Okay, now let's understand what is the difference between errors and exceptions. So let's say I print something, right? Let's say I print hello world. Now here it prints hello world, nothing new, right? But what if I miss one of the quotes like this? If I run this, it will throw a syntax error. Your program will not execute if you have a syntax error and an indentation error. So let's say I make an indentation error. If I do if true, that means this if statement will be universally true. If I do print something like hello world, okay? If I do hello world, it will print, oops. As you can see, it will print hello world. But what if I do an indentation error? As you can see, it will print indentation error. That means program will not execute if there is an indentation error and a syntax error. So this is errors, right? Now, what are exceptions? So let's say I take a user input. As I mentioned before, if I do input, and let's say enter your number, I guess. If I do this, and let's say I just print A, just for good measures. If I run the code, let's say I give an integer value, like 1. It will print 1, correct? But what if I give a character value, like code in? Keep in mind, this is an integer input, okay? Now, this is what we call an exception. What is the difference? The main difference is when you run into an error, your program will not execute unless you fix the syntax and the indentation error. However, if you run into exception, as you can see, the code still runs. The code is running perfectly. But the thing is, there is just an unexpected error in the code when I put a character because it cannot read characters since it's an integer input. If I put integer here, that will just work perfectly fine, right? Now, this is what we call an exception. This is the main difference between errors and exceptions, okay? Now, the reason why these exceptions are very problematic is because when exception occurs in Python or any kind of program, it basically crashes the code. And it's not a good thing that a code crashes, am I right? So in this video, we'll be talking about how to specifically gracefully handle any kind of exceptions that may occur in a program. And we do it by using 3 keywords, or we say 3 methods, we can say that. That is try, except, and finally. So in this video, we're looking at all 3 of them. Now let's get a glimpse of when to use try and except. We'll talk about finally in a bit. So first, let's talk about these 2, right? Let's say that you have a program like this one where you know if user does not enter his input correctly, it may lead to an error. Like let's say I do enter your number. Pretty standard program, pretty standard code. We have done it many times in the past. But there's a deal. There's a small problem with this code. If I run it, it runs. It asks me for my number, so I'll give it 20. As you can see, it prints 20. Okay, working perfectly fine. But what if I do code in? I don't give it a number, I give it a character. As you can see, it just results in exception. Now, this is what we call an exception, okay? Because the program is running, there's no syntax errors in the code, but the thing is, it's not logically correct because I gave a string in an integer input. Now this is what we call exception, and try except help us to actually gracefully handle these kind of exceptions. Now what we'll do is put try. So this is basically a block of code. So try is basically the block of code that you want to execute where you know there might be a potential risk of code not functioning correctly. Now, we'll do except. What happens is, let's say user inputs a string in this line, right? Now, it cannot print p because it will result in error. So what we do is, if this line results in an error, we'll basically catch it, right, with except. And we'll tell the user, saying in this block of code, which is except, I will tell the user that that was an invalid input. Now, if we do that, let's say if we run the code again, let's do it. Now, let's say I give something again, code in. Now it will tell me that that was an invalid input. As you can see right here, we didn't run into big red error. It basically displayed whatever we catched inside our except block. So this is what exception handling is. Now let's move on to the types of exceptions. Now there are a couple types of exceptions that I will talk about in this video. There are more exceptions than that, but like we'll get them slowly in upcoming videos. So the first one is the zero division error. Okay, so this is zero division error. So when does it occur? For example, 10 divided by 0. Now mathematically it will result to infinity, but In Python, it will just result to error because it's not logically correct. Okay, so this will result in zero division error. Now another is index error. So this error occurs when you try to access an item in a list that does not exist. So let's say A is the list of 1, 2, and 3. Now if you try to access an item that does not exist in a list, for example, this is index 0, index 1, index 2. So if I try to access an item of, like, let's say 3, this item right here does not exist in the list, right? There's no item that has index 3. So this will result in an index error. Now, same way for dictionary, let's say you try to access a key that does not exist. For example, this is a dictionary of, let's say, name, and that is coded. Okay. So let's say I try to access age. Now, age key does not exist. This key does not exist. So this will throw an key error. Okay. Same goes for type error. So when does a type error exist? Now a type error occurs when you try to operate two different types of data types. Let's say you're doing an addition and you add, let's say, a string, which is, let's say, text in this case, with a numeral. All right. So this operation cannot be performed because a string and integer cannot be added, right? So this will throw a type error. Okay. Another is value error. We already talked about this. So this is an error that occurs when, let's say, you enter an input. Let's say there is an input of integer. Okay. Something here. And you give a string to this input. Let's say user enters a string like we talked about earlier. This will throw a value error. Now, these all are the errors that we'll talk about in this video, but there are a couple more, even I think more than these errors. There are total 4 or 5 more errors in Python beside this. So we'll talk about those in future episodes, okay? Now, the reason I showed you the different types of exceptions is because you can individually handle these all exceptions. Let's make a small program of division, okay? So we'll do a equals, we'll take an integer input from the user. We'll do input and enter your number, okay? So we will divide 10 by a. So let's say c equals 10 divided by a, right? And we'll print a. Sorry. Like that. And what we'll do is do an except block here. And first, if the user enters a string value or character value here, this will throw a value error. So what we can do is tell the user except value error. If a value error occurs in the try block, we can tell the user, please enter an integer. Okay. We can tell the user that. Now, we have handled the error in this line of code, right? What if user enters 0 here? 0 is also an integer, right? But if 0 comes to this line of code, this here will throw a 0 division error. So what we can do is do another except block. This time we'll catch 0 division error and we'll print telling the user the number cannot be 0, right? After that, let's run the code here. Let's try to run it. Sorry. We'll do that. And let's say we give 10. Oh, I accidentally printed it. Okay. Let's give the value 10. As you can see, it will divide the number. Now let's give integer value here, saying codin. It will say please enter integer as we mentioned in this except block. And let's give the value of a as 0. Now this will say the number cannot be 0. Now finally, let's talk about finally. So finally in Python is basically a block of code that will run regardless if a code runs into an exception. Let's say we do finally the code has executed. Okay, we can type this. Let's say we do the number 10. If the code does not run into error, it will still run, right? As you can see here. If the code does run into an exception, let's say we type code and it will run into the value error, it will still run. Let me just comment this part out and again execute it, right? To show you guys. Let's give code in. It will throw a big error saying, value error and whatever. This code will still run. Okay, so finally is a block of code that will run regardless if a code runs into exceptions or not. Now, finally is especially useful for resource management tasks. Let's say in try block, right? Let's say you're opening a file. So let's suppose this is opening a file and you didn't use the with open method. We learned this in the last video. So if you haven't checked it out, please do. So let's close this and basically just say this is the finally code, right? You can just f.close or whatever. You can close the file in this finally block of code. Closing the file. So this is one of the examples for using finally. It's also used to, let's say you're working with database and in try block, you're establishing connections and communicating with databases, and in finally block of code you can just disconnect, or you can use to closing the database connections. Now let's move on to raising an exception. So we know up until now that exception occurs when there's something logically wrong with the code, correct? Now sometimes we have to manually raise an exception if something goes wrong in the code. So let's say what we can do is, let's suppose we are creating a program that takes the user input's age and prints it. That's it. Simple code. But there's a small catch. Let's try to make it. Let's do try and age equals int because age is an integer. So let's do enter your age. Okay. Now here's the deal. We know age cannot be less than 0. Age is always greater than 0, correct? Let's do if age is less than 0, raise value error. So what we're doing is basically, if user inputs an age that is less than 0, we create manually a value error. And that value error says age cannot be negative. Okay. And after that, we'll just simply print age. If age is greater than 0, this will get printed. Simple. Now we'll do except to catch the value error that we raised in a given condition as value error as e. So what is e? E is basically variable that stores whatever that has been raised. So in this case, it will store this string right here. Age cannot be 0. Now we'll just simply print e like that. Let's try to run this code. Let's first give an age that's greater than 0, like 10. And it will print 10, simple enough. Let's try to run it again. And this time, let's give an age that is less than 0. So -1. As you can see, it basically displays whatever that we wrote. Age cannot be negative. I hope you understood what a raise does in Python. If you didn't, please comment down below. And that's it for today's video, guys. If you found the video helpful, please like the video and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. And also check out coding.com for more interactive coding courses. And with that said, I'll see you guys in the next video. Bye bye.